What's going on, Fusion? Definitely missing you guys. I hope all of you are doing well. I guess it's like, what are we on now? Week 5 of being separated. Definitely getting tired of it. Definitely ready to come back here, just hang out with each and every one of you. But for the time being, this is what we got. So this is what we're going to do. I was really just kind of thinking last week we talked about fear, and I was just really trying to think through kind of what to talk about this week. And I was just very, to say the least, kind of stumped. I had a lot of topics in mind, and then some days I just had nothing in mind. So it was kind of neat just the way it kind of all worked out, because I got here and I was like, I have no idea. Like, what am I even going to say? Guys, this is just a complete no prep, no nothing. And so I got here and Psalms 23 kind of popped in my head. I was like, oh, that's really neat. That could be something that we could do kind of a multiple little devotion on, and do a couple shorter message. And I think that's kind of the pattern that we're going to use probably from this point on. Might not do live that often anymore, but I'm going to try to send you some just a little bit more shorter clips and just kind of thoughts on more things throughout the week, in hopes for a little bit more participation. So if you have yet to join, you've noticed that some of our students are missing and some things that we do. Reach out to them, shoot them a text, encourage them to come hang out. Probably try out House Party this week. I know a lot of you already used that, so that's a really fun app. But let's look at Psalms 23, and here we have David writing. And David, when we look at him, we have a lot of, we tend to look at David as just like, this guy was at the high of the highs. Like, he beat the Goliath, he was king. This dude is the man. But what we tend to forget about David is David had a lot of lows too. He had people coming after him trying to kill him. He lost a child during childbirth. He was a murderer. All sorts of lows that David had. So it wasn't just that he was always on the high. That David is this guy that we can't really relate to. He's not this unreachable pedestal. So there's a couple things that I want to point out real quick, and one of them, as you're reading your Bible, I want you to remember that you're not the star. You're not the star of each and every Bible story. Each and every Bible story is not, what about me? What about me? How do I relate to that? Like, that comes, and that's a great thing to interject yourself in. But the star of the Bible isn't you. It's Jesus. It's His redemption over the world. Now, this Psalms 23 isn't necessarily a messianic book. It's not necessarily forecasting Jesus, but let's look at the terminology here, because a lot of times we see God as let's look at some other names of God. Like Creator. You go and look at a Creator, and that means something everywhere. This is this big old moment, and so David does something a little bit different here in Psalms 23. In Psalms 23 verse 1, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Now, if you know a whole lot about shepherds, they're a protector of the flock. They're the ones that keep everyone safe. They account for the food. They account for the water. Now, the really, really cool thing here is it brings this personal level of who God is. God is wrapped up in me. He cares about me because He is my shepherd. So you have David, who's had the highest of highs, the lowest of lows, and he's saying, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Other versions say, I shall not want. I don't need. He is everything. So let's look over at John 10 real quick, and then we're going to come back and kind of wrap up. And in John 10 and Psalms 23 can kind of correlate with each other, and we'll probably hop back and forth as we look through this study. But let's read the first 6 verses of John 10. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisee, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. So, look at that picture that's being painted here in John. Look at the picture that's being painted here in the first verse of Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd. So David knew God's voice. Do you know God's voice? Who's leading you? A lot of times the question, well, how do I know if God's speaking to me? How do I know if it's the enemy speaking to me? How do I know? And I don't want to oversimplify it, but if you're in His Word and you're reading and you're learning and you're seeking His face, it's impossible to not know who's talking to you. It's impossible not to know which voice is leading you. I assume this is true. It's been a story that kind of goes around, but even if it's not true, it really is a cool way to kind of look at what truth is and then what untruth, falseness, whatever it is. So, long story, kind of boils down to in the FBI training, when you're looking at counterfeit money, you don't study what is counterfeit. You don't study the various different forms of counterfeit money. However, what you do is you study what the real thing is, so that when you see a fake, you automatically know that's not real. So if we're studying what is real, what is truth right here, if we're seeking that, if we're taking this moment and we're all absorbed in who God is and who our shepherd is and who our creator is, it's impossible to hear the wrong voice. And you see in John 10, Jesus is telling this story that, the sheep know who comes in the gate. The sheep knows the voice. Even when they're out of the pen, they won't follow someone else's voice because it is not, in fact, their shepherd. You can go on YouTube and there are several different forms of this video, I believe, and maybe I'll try to find one to kind of attach at the end of this. But they let the crowd holler at the sheep, give a command. The sheep don't move. They don't recognize the voice. And then all of a sudden, the shepherd calls. And all of a sudden, all these sheep start looking up. And they run to the shepherd. So as we go through this study, whose voice are you listening to? Whose voice are you studying? If you're confused about who's talking to you, search in the truth. Don't search in the different forms of the counterfeit. Search in the truth. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. In this time, it's super easy to be nervous. It's super easy to be afraid. It's